Ron Holland is one of 3 G League Ignite players I expect to be taken in the first round of this year's 2024 NBA draft. And Ron Holland is a guy who was a top 5 recruit out of high school and somebody who chose the G League Ignite route. Obviously, as we know now, he's going to be part of the last G League Ignite crew or class, should be better said. He's around 6'6", 205, might be a little bit shorter than that. He's a wing. He's a wing who is not a great shooter, so that already you start to kind of assess where his ceiling is just based off of that. Now, what are his positives? I mean, he's a guy who a lot of people talk about. He's got a really good motor. He plays the game hard, and he's a guy who plays defense. He rotates, he runs, and he's a player who you'd most likely like to have on your team if he can kind of start to learn the game a little bit better and understand where he needs to be on the court and when to kind of use some of that motor and how to appropriately manage it. And so he's really aggressive. He can create steals and turnovers like I'm talking about on the defensive end of the court. And he has this ability. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Justice Winslow, where if he makes a mistake on the offensive end of the court or a teammate, it's like he runs back like at 110% speed. He's like, it infuriates him, it gets him going, and he's not going to allow a fast break bucket, whether that's going to be a foul, a steal, or a block shot. Ron Holland is certainly a guy who gets back into defensive transition. He's also a guy, and this helps raise, I think, some of his ceiling, who's shown some flashes as being like a decent playmaker. And as somebody who's going to be off the ball, if he can turn out to be a secondary playmaker, that's going to really help his NBA stock in the future. And I think he's an above average athlete. I don't think he's let me think of a good example. Like, he's not like a world-class athlete, somebody who's just jumping out of the gym and you're just kind of blown away by his athleticism. I think he's above average to good, but I don't think he's like a great elite athlete, if that makes sense. And he can hit in rhythm, catch and shoot threes. He did seem to improve a bit, I would say, as the G League season went on before his injury. But there's certainly major question marks around his shooting. And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that while he can hit some in rhythm catch and shoot threes, he did need a lot of time and space to get those shots off. And that is something that is not going to come quickly. That's going to take major time and effort on Ron Holland's part to improve his shooting mechanics and ability. And I don't think it's something that you will see translate in the next year or two. It's about 3 or 4 years away if it's going to happen. So would I draft Ron Holland? Maybe. And I'm honestly leaning towards no. The reason I say maybe is if I had a team where I had a shooting big man, a really good, shooting guard or wing who I could kind of hide some of Ron Holland's weaknesses with, and his strengths will play up, his motor, his defensive tenacity, and then his secondary playmaking ability, maybe. But if I have a team with some other guys who may not be great shooters, Ron Holland wouldn't be a guy I'd be drafting. Now, having said that, if you're drafting in the range where I think you'll have to pick Ron Holland, that may not be something you're really considering. You may just be looking for the best player available. And I think Ron Holland goes in the same draft range, as I said, for Matas Buzelis. I think he goes anywhere from 4 to 12. Now, could there be some, could he go higher than that in the top 3? Yeah, but personally, I just don't see the value there in picking Ron Holland in the top 3. In terms of a fit, I think the Hawks could be a good fit. Potentially, they seem to have a decent amount of shooting. Obviously, it depends on who they decide to keep between Trae Young, DeJounte Murray. That matters a lot. The Bulls, I think, depending on what happens with DeMar DeRozan, they could certainly be looking for a wing. And then the Jazz, I think, could certainly use a wing. They've got Lauri Markkanen, they've got Keontae George, depending on what happens with Taylor Hendricks, they're starting to build out a nice young core, and I think Ron Holland could actually fit in there with some more shooting around him. Now, they did get rid of Kelly Olynyk, who would have been a nice center to have for Ron Holland, but I still think there's enough shooting around in Utah that it could work out for him there. So my comp for Ron Holland is, quite frankly, something that if you're a Ron Holland fan, you're not gonna love. But I think his comp as of right now is he's got a higher potential, so a higher ceiling. But a guy like Andre Jackson, a guy who came out of college, he spent 3 years at UConn. He was not a good shooter, but he was a guy who could impact the game with his athleticism, his ability to defend and make plays for others. So let me know what you guys think about Ron Holland in the comments below. If you like this video, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel for more NBA draft content. See you next time.